Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Ayin Bet and Bava Basra. We are in the middle of, or closing in. In fact, today is the last daf in the fourth parak of Bava Basra, Hamocheres Habayis. We're still dealing with transactions. In fact, the next parak, which is called Hamocheres Hasvina, is going to deal with the same basic concept. When you sell something and you don't give all the details of the sale transaction, what's included and what's not. And let me share my screen, and we'll really get started as to what we're covering at the moment. So here we go. So yesterday we concluded with a statement of Rav Huna, and Rav Huna said that if one sells land and retains for himself 2 trees, he retains the land beneath the trees. Now, this is important because ordinarily, when you sell 2 trees, you don't sell the land that's associated with it. When you sell 3 trees, if they're at the proper distance, we assume that all the land has gone with it as well. So that's a very important distinction. But so as a result, when you sell 2 trees, you don't include land, but when you leave over for yourself 2 trees, you do include land, Rav Huna said. And Rav Huna explained that it's because the trees effectively harm the land that is being left. And so if you were to sell that land to the buyer, the buyer could at some point, in particular when those trees die, say to you, listen, you got to move those trees. They're ruining my land. And he would have a good argument. And so as a result, Rav Huna says that even Rabbi Akiva would say that who says ordinarily ba'ayin yafa mocher, and therefore when you sell something, you try and sell as much as possible. Even so, he would say that if you retain 2 trees, you don't only retain the trees, you retain some land that is beneath the trees. And this differs from if you were to sell all of a field and retain for yourself a pit or a cistern. In that situation, where you retain for yourself the pit or the cistern, you retain no land associated with it. There's no land around it. You have no access to it. So that's a very, very important distinction that Rav Huna is making when about retaining trees for yourself. Now, we originally thought that this was true for both the rabbis who say ba'ayin ra mocher and for Rabbi Akiva who says ba'ayin yafa mocher. And indeed, that's how Rav Huna made his statement. However, based on Rabbi Shimon's statement in our Mishnah, that one who consecrates land also consecrates the carob and sycamore trees therein, because those trees are nourished from the consecrated land, we concluded that it must be that Rabbi Shimon agrees with Rabbi Akiva, and while Rav Huna's statement must be only true for the rabbis. And so now, as we pick up at the top of Ayin Bet Amud Aleph, the Gemara wonders whether we can truly say that Rabbi Shimon agrees with Rabbi Akiva, because we are going to find there's a statement of Rabbi Shimon that seems to disagree with Rabbi Akiva. So, it's going to be an unattributed brisa that we're going to quote now, and that unattributed brisa is going to be inconsistent with Rabbi Akiva, inconsistent with the rabbis, and we are going to effectively say that it must be Rabbi Shimon. So let's take a look. We're at the very top of Ayin Bet Amud Aleph. Umimatzis mukmas la Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Akiva. 1 second, can you actually say that Rabbi Shimon agrees with Rabbi Akiva, that they have one viewpoint? Tanya, we have the following brisa. Hikdish shlosha ilanos. If you consecrate 3 trees, so again, ordinarily, whenever you sell or consecrate 3 trees, you include the land. So then, mimata asara lebesa, if it's planted with a density of 10 trees to a besa, that's the proper density for growing saplings. So hare hikdish es hakarka ve'es ha'ilanos shebinehem. Well, then you have consecrated not only the trees, but you've also consecrated the land and any littler trees that are between them. Lefikach kishehu poda, and therefore when you go and you redeem it, poda bezera chomer seorim b'chamisha shekel kesef. You have to redeem you don't redeem based on the value of the trees. You redeem it as if you're selling land that is totally inclusive. And so Rashbam explains, take a look. We're going to do a couple of Rashbam now. So we'll start with the Rashbam 4 lines down in the narrow lines of the Rashbam. Gimel ilanos, right? You sell 3 trees. Chashivi sadei ha'ilan. Because when you sell 3 trees, that constitutes a field of trees. V'hiktish karka iman. And therefore you have sanctified, you've consecrated the land with them. Kol hatzarach li'nekayan, nikatam, anything necessary for their nourishment. Ubenetios myri, and we must be talking about saplings, new plantings. De'ilu be'ilana zukanim, because if we were talking about older trees, Amru, they said, below Yachbor, in the parak lo Yachbor, that's the second parak of Bava Batra, debate sa tzarech l'shlosha, that it's not a 10 trees to a beit saw. You need 3 trees to a beit saw. So there's a lower density of trees to land when they're adult trees. And that makes sense because an adult tree needs more space in order to be successfully grown. So that's Rashbam number 1. Then we'll skip down. So v'es ha'ilanos, and we say that we include other trees there. Ketanim shebenehem, we're talking about the smaller trees, the brand new trees that are growing up among them. Ukishahu podeh, and we said that when he redeems it, this is now from the bottom of the narrow lines in Rashbam. It's about 9 or 10 lines up in the narrow lines. He doesn't have to he doesn't have to redeem the trees based on their value. And separately the land based on the calculation that is said at the end of Sefer Vayikra in Bechukosai, that it says in Parak of Zion of Vayikra, im mistei achuza so yakdish, if one sanctifies, if one consecrates land that is inherited land that is passed from generation to generation, ishla Hashem, if somebody does that to God, so then its value should be lefi zaro zera chomer seorim b'chamishim shekel kesef, that land that would be sufficient to plant a chomer of seorim of barley, that land gets redeemed for 50 shekel kesef, and that shekel kesef is ela hakol podeh biyachad. But rather you don't redeem the trees and the land separately, but rather you redeem everything together. Lefi cheshbon beit zera chomer seorim b'nun shekel, based on the pasuk saying that the amount of the plants a chomer of seorim for 50 shekel kesef. Dahainu lebeit kor Sela upundion. So every beit kor, which is a beit kor, so every beit kor you would pay 1 sela and 1 pundion l'shana, because the way that works is that the 50 shekel calculation is based on your ownership for 49 years, because every 50th year the land goes back to the original owners. So as a result, when you dedicate something, you can redeem it based on the number of years left until the next Yovel period. Shezeu cheshbon nun shekel kesef lemem tet shnei Yovel. That's how you, if you take 50 and you divide 49 into it, it's 1 and 1/49. Now a pundian technically is 1/48 of a shekel. So Ella sheyesh pundian yoter. There's one extra pundian, Rashbam explains. B'shvil hakara k'nemefarish be'erachin dahasela lo havi ela memchet pundian. As we explained in Maseches Erechim, which we haven't gotten to in this cycle, but we will, God willing. So that will also, that's the idea that we're going to have one sela plus one pundian, or one shekel and one pundian. Those are the same thing. So that's the amount that would need to be paid in order to redeem this field, and you don't separately redeem the trees. Now let's continue with this brisa. So again, the first part of the brisa says if you dedicate 3 trees that are in the proper density to hektish, you are going to treat it as if you also were sanctifying, also consecrating the land that's associated with it. And when you went to redeem it, because the point of this sanctification was not obviously to bring a sacrifice. The point of this sanctification is to donate money to the Beis HaMikdash. And the way that the money was achieved was often the person who did the sanctification would redeem the object sanctified himself. And so here you would redeem it yourself based on this valuation. But as we pick up on the sixth line, I'm sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah, sixth line, third word of on Ayin Bet Amud Aleph, Pachos Mikan, if the concentration of the trees was less, o yoter, or greater, al kain, than the amount that we just said, o shekdishan b'zeh achar zeh, or you didn't do your hektish, you didn't do the sanctification, the consecration of all 3 trees at one time, but rather you did it one after the other. Well, then in that situation, harei zeh lo hektish lo akarka v'lo es ha'ilanos shebenehen. Well, then you have only sanctified these 3 individual trees and not the land that is between them. Lafika kashehu podeh, and therefore when you want to redeem those trees, podeh es ha'ilanos b'shaveyen. Well, then you're going to redeem those trees based on their value, because you have not consecrated, you have not sanctified any of the land that's associated with it. Below od ela afilu hektish es ha'ilanos v'chazar v'hektish es hakarka. If you were to do the 3 trees individually and then sanctify the land. So in the end, this is very important, in the end of this particular case, everything is still sanctified. You've sanctified all 3 trees that are in the proper distance, and you've sanctified the land. You just didn't do it all at one time. If you had sanctified all 3 trees at once, well, then you would have sanctified everything all together, and you'd be in case number 1. In this situation, you sanctified tree number 1, tree number 2, tree number 3, and then all of the land. So the end result, you're at the same place. And yet, kishehu poda es ha'ilanos b'shaveyen, v'chozer upoda beis zera chomer se'orim v'chamishim shekel kesef. So, and yet, we in the end say that you have to redeem the tree separately and the field separately. You can't just redeem the field, even though in the first case, when you dedicated the 3 trees to hektish and you included the land in it, you were able, when you redeemed it, only to redeem the land. Here, in this case, when you sanctified the 3 trees individually, and because it didn't include the land, you then sanctified the land. So you ended up in the exact same place. When it comes to redemption, we focus on how you got there, and you have to redeem the trees separately from the land. So now, before we understand, again, we're asking the question, how can Rabbi Shimon agree with Rabbi Akiva? We have to establish who is the author of this brisa that we just cited. So Mani, who is this author? So Rabbi Akiva, if you want to tell me that it's Rabbi Akiva, ha'amar mocher ba'ayin riyafa mocher. He's the one who says that when you sell something, you sell something generously. V'chol shekain makdish. And certainly when it comes to sanctification, you are going to do so generously. So as a result, this brisa can't be Rabbi Akiva, because again, Rabbi Akiva would say that even if you were to do one tree, you would include some land associated with it. Iyat Rabbanan, and if you tell me that it's the rabbis, ha'amri mocher hu deba'ayin ra mocher. The rabbis say that you only sell stingily, but you don't of al makdish ba'ayin yafa makdish. But he agrees with Rabbi Akiva that you are going to be generous in your sanctification, in your consecration. So El Pshita Rabbi Shimon he. So it must be Rabbi Shimon. We're not left with any other opinion, and that we must be left with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. And so clearly Rabbi Shimon disagrees with Rabbi Akiva. And what does Rabbi Shimon say? Rabbi Shimon is basically telling us that he says that even sanctification is ba'ayin ra. So whereas the Rabbanan say that when it comes to selling, you are stingy, but when it comes to consecrating, you're generous. For Rabbi Shimon, not only are you stingy by selling, you're also stingy by consecrating. So Rabbi Shimon, aliba deman. Now, whose mindset is Rabbi Shimon agreeing with? Aliba de Rabbi Akiva. If you want to tell me that it's like Rabbi Akiva, ha'amar mocher ba'ayin yafa mocher v'kol shekain makdish. It doesn't make any sense to say like Rabbi Akiva, because he is the one who says that you sell generously, and certainly you're going to be makdish generously. So ela pshita aliba de rabbanan. It must be that when it comes to sales, he must agree with the rabbis. And he's saying, because of Rabbi Shimon, ki hechi de mocher ba'ayin ra mocher, makdish nami ba'ayin ra makdish, u'mishayer ara. And so as a result, when you sell something, you're selling it with a very stingy outlook. And similarly, you're going to makdish, you're going to consecrate with a stingy outlook. And that means you're going to leave over for yourself trees. And so as a result, we turn over to ayin bet amud bet. Second, ve'elakasha hoel b'yonkin mistei hektish. Well, one second. So where are we at the moment? Right now, we've shown that Rabbi Shimon must disagree with Rabbi Akiva. He does not agree with Rabbi Akiva. But that was a key element for our explaining how Rav Huna could be consistent with the rabbis, and Rabbi Shimon would be consistent with Rabbi Akiva. But now that we said that Rabbi Shimon's not consistent with Rabbi Akiva, that he in fact disagrees with Rabbi Akiva, and that Rabbi Shimon really agrees with the rabbis, so we are left with a troubling situation with how do we understand Rav Huna's position. So, and in fact, not only how do we understand Rav Huna's position, but how can we understand Rabbi Shimon's position? Because in the Brisa, Rabbi Shimon is saying that one consecrates in a stingy manner, but when it comes to our own Mishnah that we just learned, we said that he consecrates in a more generous manner, because not only does he consecrate all of the land, but we say that he has to include the old trees, the carob tree that's been grafted, the sycamore that's been cut back. Those trees have to be included. And so how can we say he's the one who says that you are stingy when you consecrate things? So how can he say that you're generous when you consecrate things? Ella Rabbi Shimon l'divrei d'Rabbanan kamar. So when we have to understand that Rabbi Shimon's statement in our Mishnah was actually a challenge to the rabbis, and he was saying,
so who wins?
We're going to see in a moment. He was challenging and saying that the rabbis, you should not be so generous. You should not say that, after all, what you say, that when you sell stingily, but when you consecrate generously. Yes, that may be true, but there is a medium situation. You don't have to, there's generous and then there's over generous, and you don't need to be over generous. And so as a result, Rabbi Shimon is saying, I understand if you want to be generous with respect to the land and say that all the land is included, and therefore the carob tree and the sycamore tree are going to be included. But why are you including the pit, the winepress, and the shovach and the dovecote? You don't need to include those. Rabbis, you could still say that for when it comes to those three, you're stingy. And so that's what he's saying. Lididi, according to me, I say that you're stingy with respect to selling and consecrating the shiur mishayer, and therefore you leave over some of the field. Lididchu, according to you, so who say that the whole field goes, but at least you could say oduli. You should admit to me, Mia delo hektish elacharav murkav v'sadan hashikma. You should only include the trees that require nourishment from the land. Why in the world would you include the pit? It doesn't require nourishment from the land. The shovach, the dovecote, it doesn't require nourishment from the land. And the gat and the winepress, that doesn't require any nourishment from the land. So Rabbi Shimon says that's what he's saying. But Amri le Rabbanan, and the rabbis say, no, lo shna. Once we're generous, we're going to be generous about everything. And so as a result, now we've explained. So the implication is that we have Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Akiva are disagreeing. And so now we can go back, and our new understanding of Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah allows us to say that actually Rav Huna is consistent with both Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Akiva. And he's consistent with everybody. And everybody agrees that in fact, when you consecrate or sell everything but 2 trees, you're going to retain for yourself the land. And the point that was made in the Mishnah about sanctification and how you would include the land and therefore have to include the trees, that was not actually of anyone's real opinion. It was not the rabbi's opinion, who say that you're going to be generous and include everything. And it was not Rabbi Shimon's opinion, who was actually speaking in the rabbi's name, even though the rabbis rejected his point of view. And so as a result, Rav Huna effectively wins, as Mark would put it, because Rav Huna's position ends up being consistent with everybody. So, but now that we've said all of that, we are not done with our questioning. So, b'mayu kimtala. So, how have we established the brisa of saying that when one sanctifies 3 trees, he includes the land? Karebi Shimon. But if you don't, then you don't include the land. We say that it's Rebbe Shimon. Well, Ema Seifa. 1 second. Is that possible to say that this brisa is really like Rebbe Shimon? Because what about the end of that brisa that we quoted a few moments ago? V'lo od ela afilu hektish es ha'ilanos v'chazar v'hektish es hakarka. We said that if you consecrate each of the trees individually, and then you go back and consecrate the land, then Kishahu Poda, when he redeems, Poda as Hailanas B'Shavehen, V'chozer Poda Besa Erez Chomer, Se'orim B'chamishim Shekel Kedesh, Kesef. You have to redeem the trees and the land separately. Mark, they could use you downstairs. Okay? V'i Rabbi Shimon, and if you want to tell me that this is Rabbi Shimon, see you soon. Lezel Basar Pidyon. Shouldn't we go after the time of the redemption? Meaning, the point is that again, at the end, at the moment of redeeming, you have the 3 trees and all of the land are all consecrated. So when you redeem it, why don't we allow you to just redeem the land, and that will include the trees? After all, if you had consecrated the trees together and thereby also consecrated the land, meaning if you did a single consecration of the whole thing, we would allow you to just redeem the land and not have to redeem the trees separately. So why is it that we make you redeem everything? doesn't that show that we follow the moment of consecration and not the moment of redemption? But ve'i Rabbi Shimon laser basar pidyon. If it actually is a statement, if this brisa was really written by Rabbi Shimon or said by Rabbi Shimon, we should follow the time of the redemption. V'nifkaru agav araihu, and we should allow them to be redeemed based on the trees to be redeemed based on the land. Because we learn elsewhere, and we're going to quote it in just a moment, that Rabbi Shimon follows the time of the redemption. So how do I know that Rabbi Shimon follows the time of the redemption? Titania, because we have the following brisa. Minayin lelokeach sada me'aviv. If one were to buy a field from his father, v'hikdisha, and now he sanctified the field. So again, we'll have Abraham and Yitzchak. Yitzchak buys a field from Abraham and sanctifies it while Abraham is still alive. V'achar kach meis avim, and now Abraham has passed away. Minayin shedehei lefanav kistei achuza. How do I know that should be redeemed based on the valuation of a ancestral property? Because again, in Parshas Bechukosai, in Parakov Zion of Sefer Vayikra, it tells us how we redeem property that has been consecrated. And there is a special redemption process and rules associated with redeeming ancestral land, meaning everybody has every Jewish person has a piece of land in Israel that is their inheritance. And so as a result, when if in fact we're in the world back to where we were, immediately upon entering the land of Israel, or shortly after entering the land of Israel, where we had the Yovel and you had all those rules that were associated with it. If you consecrate for the Beis Hamikdash a piece of land that is your family's ancestral land, that has one rule of redemption, and you have to pay 50 shekel for every beit kor. But if it's not your ancestral land, well, then there's a valuation that is a separate valuation. Basically, it's what is it actually worth, and that's the amount that you redeem it for. So the point is that according to this new brisa, how do I know that even though the Yitzchak has consecrated the land while Abraham was still alive? So it was not his ancestral land yet because Abraham was still alive. It was Abraham's ancestral land. Talmud lo. So how do I know that now that Abraham has died, Yitzchak can use the ancestral land redemption rate and not the just the valuation rate? Talmud lomar v'im estei miknaso asher lo mistei achuzaso. But if somebody consecrates to Hashem his acquired field that is not of his ancestral fields, so what is this talking about? This is talking about stay. She'ein ru'uya liyot stei achuza. The point is, it's not just something that's not now your ancestral field. We're going to understand this as meaning that it's a field that is never possibly going to be your ancestral field. So Yatzasazu, that excludes Sheru'uya liyos stei achuza, this field, which Yitzchak bought from Abraham, and now consecrated before Abraham died, it is fit to become his ancestral field. And when Abraham dies, it is effectively like his ancestral field. And that's Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Shimon. So clearly Rabbi Shimon follows the moment of redemption, because at this moment of redemption, it is his ancestral field. So Rabbi Meir disagrees. No, you're wrong, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir is saying. Rabbi Meir is saying that only if Abraham dies before Yitzchak consecrates it will we apply the broadness of the pasuk to say, oh, this is now an ancestral field. But if in fact the Yitzchak were to consecrate it before Abraham died, well, then he's consecrated something that is not ancestral land yet. And so as a result, Rabbi Meir says you have to consecrate it only after Abraham died. You can buy it from Abraham, but yeah, you have to consecrate it after Abraham died. So Menayin Shetehei Lefanav Kistei Achuza, Tamalomer, again, the same pasuk, Ve'ima stay miknaso, asher lo mistay achuzaso. So Sedeh, She'ena Sedeh Achuza. You get the only way that it applies is if it's not an ancestral field. Yatzasazu, Histei Achuza. Because now at the time of consecration, according to Rebbe Meir, it was a steachuza. Even though you bought it beforehand, we're going to treat it like a steachuza, like an ancestral land. So what was the distinction between Rebbe Shimon and Rebbe Yehuda on the one hand and Rebbe Meir on the other hand? The distinction is that Rebbe Shimon and Rebbe Yehuda say that it doesn't make a difference whether you consecrate it before it became ancestral or after it became ancestral. So because it seems, right, that we're focusing on the moment of redemption. Ve'ilu Rebbe Yehuda, Rebbe Shimon. Now, if you're going to tell me that, that it's Rebbe Yehuda and Rebbe Shimon, Hecha de Hekdisha v'akakach meis aviv b'stei achuza damya minalahu. How do they know that if you first buy it and then if you first consecrate it and then the father dies, it's like an ancestral land? How do they know that that's true? Ima haikra, if you want to tell me it's from this pasuk, that same pasuk is used by Rebbe Meir. So what aspect of that pasuk is teaching Rebbe Yehuda and Rebbe Shimon something different than Rebbe Meir? We don't know. So therefore, we're going to say it's based on another principle. Elalav mishum da ozla basar bidjon. But it must be that Rebbe Yehuda and Rebbe Shimon are focused on the moment of redemption. And because at the moment of redemption, Abraham has passed away, and so Yitzchak is the true owner of this land, and so it's truly his ancestral land. When he now comes to redeem it, we are going to allow him to redeem it based on the ancestral land principle. So and now that we say that, why doesn't Rebbe Shimon, if Rebbe Shimon is truly the author of our brisa that talks about the consecration of the three trees, and how if you consecrate the trees individually and then consecrate the land, that when it comes to redemption, you don't just get to redeem the land, but rather you have to redeem the trees and the land separately. This is according to Rebbe Shimon. Rebbe Shimon focuses on the moment of redemption. At the moment of redemption, let him just redeem the land, and it will include the trees. So why? Isn't that problematic to say that brisa is like Rebbe Shimon? No, not necessarily. We can answer it the following way. We can say the following. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, "La'olam ba'alma Rebbe Yehuda, Rebbe Shimon lo asli basar pidyon." Really, in general, Rebbe Yehuda and Rebbe Shimon don't follow the moment of redemption. And why, in this particular case of the steachuza, do we actually follow the moment of redemption? Here they have a pasuk that they are using to derive this law. Because imkain, if you were to tell me that the only point is that if in fact Yitzchak were to buy the land, and then Abraham were to die, and then Yitzchak were to consecrate it, like Rebbe Meir. If you were to say like Rebbe Meir, lichtov kra, the pasuk could have just written v'im estei miknaso asher lo achuzaso. It could have said that the field was that he acquired that is not his ancestral heritage. Inami stei achuzaso, or it could have said that is not his ancestral field. The point is that my asher lo misdei achuzaso. Why does it say it's not from his ancestral fields or of his ancestral fields? So it's coming to say that even this field, which is possible to become his steachuza, even though at the moment of consecration it was not his steachuza, we're going to treat it as if it was. So only in this case do we follow the moment of redemption. But ordinarily, we do not follow the moment of redemption. And so therefore, we can in fact say that the earlier brisa, that the brisa that we quoted is Rabbi Shimon. And so where does that leave us? So most significantly, when it comes to Rav Huna's statement about selling land and leaving over for yourself 2 trees, we say that that statement is according to everybody, even Rabbi Akiva. And so as a result, anytime somebody were to sell land and leave over for themselves 2 trees, they are holding on to some of the land in order to allow them to replant those trees should those trees die. That's point number 1. And point number 2 is Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah is not an actual position of any authority. It is effectively a question that Rabbi Shimon was asking to the rabbis, and the rabbis reject that position. And we end up with 3 different opinions. We have Rabbi Shimon, who says that not only do you sell stingily, but you consecrate stingily. And we have Rabbi Akiva, who says not only do you sell generously, not only do you consecrate generously, but you even sell generously. And then we have the Rabbanan, who are the in-between position, who say you sell stingily, but you consecrate generously. So we have now 3 different viewpoints on these issues, and everything is now consistent and wonderful. So now that we said all of that, we had one statement of Rav Huna. We're now going to teach 2 other statements of Rav Huna. The first one relates to grafted carob and cut sycamore trees, and so it fits perfectly with the context of our Gemara right now. So Amar Rav Huna, Charav Hamurka V'Sadan HaShikma. You have that grafted carob tree and the cut back sycamore, Toras Ilan Alav, V'Toras Karka Alav. They have an aspect of tree associated with them, and they have an aspect of land associated with them. What do I mean by that? Well, the Gemara is going to explain. Toras Ilan Alav, they are like a tree, Aktish Ozabin Shnei Ilanos Vahai, because if I were to sell 2 regular trees and 1 sycamore or carob tree, well, then I've sold 3 trees. And so Yeshlo Karka, the recipient of that gift or sale, or I mean, of that consecration or that sale, also gets the land. Toras Karka Alav, and we say that a sycamore and a carob tree are treated like land. Delom Mizdabin Abba Ara, Agav Ara, that if in fact you sell them with land, we're not going to treat them as sold with the land. So Rashbam explains why we use this language, right? Meaning, why does that make the carob tree or the sycamore tree like land? Delom is dabin avar kidetanan b'masnisin, as we saw in the Mishnah. V'im hayu shnei ilanos v'hai charuv, that if in fact if a person were to have 2 trees and a carob tree, ha'ilanos mechurin v'hai einamachar, and you were to sell a field, you would end up selling the field with the 2 trees, the 2 ordinary trees, but you would be retaining for yourself the carob tree. Mishum Reisha Nakat Seifa. And because of the beginning, we're taking the end. So the point is that you get the that when it comes to the selling of trees, if you sell 2 trees with a sycamore tree, so then all the land is included with it because they're treated like trees. But if you do the reverse, if you sell the land and now you end up selling the 2 regular trees, but you end up retaining for yourself the sycamore. So effectively, the sycamore becomes like another piece of property. It's a different piece of property. And so that's why it's treated like its own piece of land. So that was teaching number 1. And having taught that teaching, so now we're going to teach another teaching of Rav Huna that also has something else that applies 2 rules to it. So v'amar Rav Huna, Omer sheyesh bo satayim, if you have a sheaf that contains 2 sa, which is more than what you ordinarily have, it's double. Usually a sheaf would contain 1 sa. Toras Omer alav, it is like a sheaf, The Torah's Gadish alav, and it's like a stack. So Torah's Omer alav. So it has the law of a sheaf. How? Deshnei Omarim Shichacha. That if you have two regular sheaves that you forgot in the field, so this is an important rule, that that the Torah grants, one of the gifts that the Torah grants to poor people are grains that are forgotten in the field, sheaves that are forgotten in the field. Now, if you forget one sheaf or two sheaves, so then that's considered forgotten. But if you forgot three sheaves, we're not going to treat that as forgotten. So when you have a very big sheaf, it is like a sheaf that when you have two other sheaves that are forgotten just by themselves, that's considered forgotten. But shnayim v'hu, if you have two sheaves and this one humongous sheaf, einan shechacha, then it's like a sheaf, and so as a result, it's considered not forgotten. This is different from a pile, because if you have a humongous pile of grain that is not yet in a sheaf, and the pile is sufficiently large, and you have two other sheaves that are right next to it that were forgotten, those sheaves are considered forgotten and go to the poor, even though the pile is right there next to it. So that's a very key difference between a pile and a sheaf. A sheaf combines with two other sheaves to make three sheaves, so that now it's no longer shechacha. But a pile doesn't combine with two sheaves. And so this large sheaf has a qualities of a sheaf to be combined with two other sheaves to make it not shechacha, and yet Torah's gadish alav, it also has the status of a stack. D'tanan omer sheyesh bo satayim. If you have a sheaf that has two sa, shechacha ein shechacha. If you forget that sheaf, you haven't forgotten anything. Meaning that sheaf alone constitutes a stack that doesn't get forgotten. And so as a result, you have the benefit of both. So if in fact you are ever in the business of gathering grain and you have to worry about shechacha, it would be a good idea to make sure that all your sheaves are double sized. Because of course, if you want to give to the poor, you should give to the poor. But if you want to avoid the shechacha, this is the only mitzvah, I think, that you can effectively, affirmatively perform by forgetting to do something, right? It's only by forgetting that you become obligated in this mitzvah. Okay, but all right, so those are the two laws of Rav Huna. So now we're going to teach one last thing, and with that we'll conclude. So Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana, Amar Reish Lakish, Charav Hamurkav, V'Sadan Hashikma. When it comes to consecrating a carob tree or a cut sycamore, a grafted carob tree or a cut sycamore, Bana l'machlokas, Rabbi Menachem, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbanan. There is an argument between Rabbi Menachem, the son of Rabbi Yossi, and the rabbis. And Rashbam helps us out here. Charav Hamurkav, V'Sadan Hashikma, fourth line from the bottom. What are we talking about? Im Kadosh, if you were to sanctify them. B'klal Sada, together with a field. Im Lav, or not. That is Banu l'machlokas Rabbi Menachem Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan. That is a disagreement between Rabbi Menachem Rabbi Yossi and the rabbis. Dila Rabbanan kadshe. According to the rabbis, that sycamore and that carob tree will be sanctified. Diba'ayin yafa makdish, because we say that when one consecrates land, he does so generously. And so therefore, all of the things that are included in the land, a sycamore, a carob, a pit, a wine press, a dovecote, all of them get sanctified with the land. Kiditan ben Masnisin, as we learned in our Mishnah. V'Rebbe Menachem b'Rebbe Yossi, Rabbi Shimon. And Rabbi Nachman ben Rabbi Yossi says, like Rabbi Shimon, Deba'ayin ra makdish. He says, not only do you sell stingily, but you sanctify stingily. Va'afilu charav shinyonik min asada lo kaddish. And even the carob tree, which needs the nourishment from the field, won't be sanctified. Why won't it be sanctified? Deba'ayin ra kol kach hektish. As hasada shishayar min hasada l'tzorach yanikas karov shalo. Because when you dedicate the field to the Beis Hamikdash, you end up leaving over for yourself the aspect of the field that would nourish the carob tree. And so as a result, you keep in your own possession not only the carob tree, but the land necessary to nourish it. Or the sycamore tree, same thing. Ukada parishas le'el, as we explained earlier, Rabbi Shimon l'divrei de Rabbanan ka'amar. And when we explained that our Mishnah, when we referenced Rabbi Shimon, he was saying a position only according to the rabbis. V'hachi havish shmi'alei Reish Lakish mirebusav. And so what did Reish Lakish hear from his teachers? He heard from his teachers, the Rabbi Menachem, Rabbi Yossi, Sfirolei, Rabbi Shimon. He heard that Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Menachem, the son of Rabbi Yossi, thought and thinks just like Rabbi Shimon. But now our Gemara has only referenced the fact that this is a machlokas between Rabbi Menachem, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan. So the Gemara then asks at the top of Ayin Gimel Lamed Aleph, as we conclude for the day, V'leima machlokas Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan. Why aren't we telling us the truth? The truth is that this is a machlokas between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. So hakamash malan to Rabbi Menachem, Rabbi Yossi, to Rabbi Shimon Sviralei. That what Reish Lakish is teaching us, what Reish Lakish and Rabba Bar Chana are teaching us, is that actually Rabbi Menachem, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Shimon agree. They have the same point of view. And so as a result, we now have, again, three different viewpoints. We have Rabbi Akiva, who says you sell generously and you dedicate to the Beis Hamikdash generously. We have the Rabbanan position, where you sell stingily, but you consecrate generously. And we have the position of Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Menachem, Rabbi Yossi, and they say that not only do you sell stingily, but you consecrate stingily. And so that concludes Hadron Allah Hamoker as a bias, Hadron Allah Hamoker as a bias, Hadron Allah Hamoker as a bias. God willing, we'll have opportunities to learn it again together. But now we come to the Perek Hamoker es Hasvina, and naturally that is going to be telling us all about the details of selling a boat. So stay tuned for the start of the 5th chapter of Maseches Bava Basra, God willing, tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
Have a wonderful day.
Yes.